Welcome to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. This podcast features powerful hypnosis, so do not listen while driving or operating machinery. This recording is not suitable for those with epilepsy or severe mental health issues. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hi, it's Adam here, and on this episode of The Hypnotist, it's going to be something a bit different. So I am quite often asked to be a guest on other people's podcasts, and very rarely are they hypnotherapy-specific podcasts. But at HypnoThoughts Live last summer, where I was presenting, I met a podcast host called Greg Bornstein, and Greg has a podcast called Open Loops, and he talks to hypnotherapists, hypnotists all over the world about their specialism, their background. And a few weeks ago, I was on the Open Loops podcast, and the episode came out yesterday, and I thought, given some of the topics that myself and Greg were talking about, and it also goes into a bit more of my background, learning psychology, struggling with anxiety, and some of the things that I don't normally cover in my podcast, because what I'm sharing is my hypnotherapy that I'm doing with other people. This, which is Greg's podcast that I'm about to share with you on my podcast, is him asking me questions about what I think about styles of therapy, different use of metaphors, and really different elements of how I look at hypnotherapy and hypnosis. And I thought it's worth sharing this because the Open Loops podcast is mainly listened to by other hypnotists. But I think if you're interested in hypnosis and hypnotherapy, which you probably are if you listen to my podcast, you might also get a lot of value from me being interviewed on his podcast. So it's called Open Loops. I'm going to put a link to his podcast in the show notes. And all I'm going to do now is have his podcast episode that follows. You can get to listen to that directly here without having to just click the link and go to that. But if you want to listen to other episodes on Open Loops, then that link is worth doing, so you can kind of check out those ones. Hope you enjoy the show. Let me know what you think of this style of episode, where you're getting to know a bit more about me and my approach and my beliefs about therapy. If you like this kind of stuff, I'll happily share more of this kind of content. Equally, if you want me to just keep sharing my hypnosis sessions that I do for other clients, happy to do that as well. Feedback's always useful. And you can put the feedback in the comments section. On Spotify, there's a comment section. I don't know if there is on Apple, but there is on lots of podcast platforms. Or you can drop me an email, and that is adam@adamcox.co.uk. But for now, this isn't a hypnotherapy session. It's me talking about hypnotherapy, which you might find useful. So hopefully you enjoy the session and let me know what you think.
Today on Open Loops, we have somebody who I am, it's a great honor to bring onto my show. I met him as one of the first people I actually spoke with this summer when I went to HypnoThoughts Live in Las Vegas for the first time, and how lucky I was to speak to this man, the host of the world-renowned podcast, The Hypnotist. We have Adam Cox here. Yes, the man at Harley Street Hypnosis in London. I mean, this is someone that really knows his stuff. The podcast, for those that aren't familiar, and we're going to get into it a little bit, he interviews other hypnotists, but more importantly, and even more interesting, he shares the hypnotist side, his side of sessions he does. So you can hear none of the client stuff. That's all confidential. You don't hear any of that. You hear the problems that are brought, and then he goes into he shares what he actually uses, metaphors and interventions and all the wonderful stuff that facilitates change, as well as something that we may have to dive into today with Adam. He loves nested loops. And that's what this show is all about, in a way, or it's a tribute to my love of loops. So I'm definitely excited to get into that with him. Adam Cox, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Greg, it's an absolute pleasure to be on the show. I think what you do is great, and yeah, looking forward to having a chat with you.
Likewise, my friend. I find it so interesting that you I mean, you might say it's a controversial opinion, but I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh man, am I going to make a dark joke about this guy's story early on? You were going to school for psychology, right?
That's
Initially.
right.
And you were at a point where you had some really negative experiences, and this
True.
just makes me think that in general, why aren't therapists mentally stable people? How can you go to school for psychotherapy and not have tools that you need to actually function in the world? But you were, and again, I'm not necessarily blaming your school for this, but you came from a dark background, or this background where you're studying this stuff, supposed to better the mind. And of course, you land where I've landed as well, which is, wow, hypnotherapy, this mind technology stuff for rapid, deep change was really a driver for you. Let's start there. Can you talk a little bit about what you found, what you were going through, and what was it about hypnosis that got you out of there?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I started studying psychology when I was 18 years old. So went to university, living on my own for the first time, and there was just this kind of a series of unfortunate events. I chipped my tooth, so didn't have a dentist where I was living. I had a skin rash, and all of these things made me very, very self-conscious. And what I did is I avoided people as a way to kind of mitigate that, because I didn't really want people judging me when I had like a rash on my face and a missing tooth, because it's like first impressions count. So I kind of lost that ability to make early kind of social connections. And then that kind of planted a seed of rewarding avoidance. So it went on to like a little sequence of ever increasing social anxiety until I became a recluse, basically. So there I am, 18, 19 years old, don't know anyone, in a town, far away from my family, and, just kind of got lost in my own kind of thoughts, which were catastrophization and kind of some dark shit, basically. And yeah, the irony didn't escape me that there I was doing a psychology degree, but anyone that's done a psychology degree knows how academic it is and how not practical it also is. Like, you learn about theories, you learn about psychologists, and there's some interesting things that you learn about, but nothing like the closest you get to kind of any kind of therapeutic change is like a module on counseling, which for therapists, that counseling is on the end of the spectrum, where it's not really about intervention, it's more about listening and listening skills. So I was in a place where I had panic attacks and very high levels of anxiety, suicidal thoughts. But I knew I didn't want to keep those feelings. Knew that if I went to a doctor and a GP, that I would be very quickly put on, kind of antidepressants or SSRIs and beta blockers. So I didn't want to be medicated. I just wanted to kind of fix this thing that I was experiencing. So I dove into all of the different kind of therapeutic modalities, and I became a guinea pig. I wanted to test this shit on myself. And what worked for me was basically certain elements of CBT, some of the third wave CBT stuff, but mainly it was hypnotherapy and certain NLP techniques. That's what actually worked. So I'm an advocate for what I do because it completely changed my life. And I feel like, I'm a big believer in, kind of the functional side of therapy. Like people don't want to spend money just talking to someone. They actually want change. And that's why I feel like hypnosis is one of those things that's what it's designed to do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very interesting because I've actually recently come into a position in my life where I'm starting to rethink my path. And I know it's very easy to talk about this with people in the hypnotherapy and the coaching space about, well, I want to go and do this stuff and study this stuff and practice with people. And when you translate that to the real world, that's out. And when I say by real world, I mean like the capitalist world out there that sort of looks at people like you and sometimes and goes like, especially in America, and they go like, well, I mean, that's not the career that we were teaching you should be doing. And what I mean by that is, like I talk to my family and they go, well, Greg, you've always been interested in this therapy stuff. Go to social work school, become a clinical psychotherapist, and that way you'll have the background. At the very least, you could go off and do this NLP and hypnosis stuff later. But here's the problem I'm having with this, Adam. I'm sitting there going like, yes, I get it. Okay, I could get another degree. It probably could legitimize myself in the same way that hypnotherapists use certifications to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean they're functional at what they do. But I'm sitting here going like, even that feels unethical. The idea of putting people through week after week of session, talking to me and getting paid to do it is just, something about it feels wrong, knowing these interventions, knowing the power of what you can do, and sometimes even one session. What do you say to that? What do you say? I mean, I don't feel like, maybe this is controversial for you because I feel like you don't normally, you might be above this controversial stuff. I feel like you are. You function in that realm. But, if you want to crap on therapy, do it. I guess what I'm asking is, what do you think about that? The idea that there are people out there, I mean, is there like almost an ethical position as a hypnotherapist that we have to take knowing that people are doing this kind of outdated talk therapy, or is there a merit in it that we're missing? What do you think?
I would use an analogy here in the sense that, there's lots of foods that I don't like, I wouldn't buy, I wouldn't eat, but I wouldn't want a world where those things don't exist because someone else might like that food and they might want to enjoy that food. So for me, I don't think that counseling is that useful. I don't think like psychoanalysis is that useful. But for some people, if they've got belief systems built around, that if they just talk enough, then that's cathartic and it's useful. Well, then the belief system that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It makes it work for them. That they say, oh, I've got my therapist. Like that might be the support that they need. They just need someone to talk to. Or it might be that there's some kind of presupposition that if you talk about your childhood enough, that you're going to have some kind of breakthrough. So it's not for me, in the same way that, I wouldn't have chocolate ants, as a snack,
Yes.
But equally, I'm not going to, have a world where things aren't allowed, because I think what's great is that people vote with their feet and they vote with their wallets. And if the world needs counselors and they need psychotherapists and they need, even, I mean, there's a lot of people that look down on things like homeotherapy and Reiki and those kind of things, but I think they're rooted in belief systems. Like if you have a strong belief system on the power of energy work or the power of essential oils, that itself means it can be a very effective modality for people. For some people, it's music. For some people, it's recreational drugs. I think it's great that we live in a world where people get to do what they want to do. And for some people, they might want those kind of things that we might look down on as hypnotherapists and say, yeah, but that's very slow. It's not effective. Okay, fine. But they might figure that out later. A lot of people go on a journey where they find the right kind of approach for their change. And for some people, that isn't therapist. That's kind of certain social groups, or it might be personal development, or it might be a good book. It doesn't have to be hypnotherapy, NLP. I just think I'm a big advocate of it because it's helped me and I've helped lots of other people. So, I think it's great, but other people, if their belief systems are that it's all woo-woo and nonsense and placebo, then it won't work for them because their belief systems prevent it from helping them.
Yeah. That is a diplomatic answer, as I expected it might be. I mean, but I also, I mean, I think it's a legitimate answer. It does make me, I mean, it's kind of like the whole, I'm not going to say equate hypnotherapy or therapy with big pharma, talk therapy with big pharma, but it does. There are just times when I'm going, does there need to be more of an awareness? I mean, I don't know well, let me ask you this. In terms of the way you operate, you have your podcast, you're out there doing what you do. And I do think that what you're doing is a testament to the idea of, okay, well, look, I'm not necessarily, like I have no idea. I haven't listened to enough of your work, and I want to know if, in between certain episodes, you're going like, and by the way, stop doing traditional therapy, end it. Like if you're whispering that to people, I don't think you are. It's my intuition here. So if that's the case, then it's a great example of here's somebody who's finding something that works. But what you tend to focus on expands, so you keep focusing on it and doing it, and it's magnifying, and that's why you have had as much growth and abundance in your space as you have personally, speaking at all the conferences and whatnot, too. But is there ever a part of you that goes, I need to have an activist approach here. I feel an imperative to help people that are mentally not there know more about this, as opposed to these other quote unquote less effective things? Or is that just totally out of your worldview? Like, how did you come to reconcile that if that is indeed what you're doing?
So my thoughts is that you can get the law of reverse effect. So if I was this guy saying, kind of psychoanalytical approaches, these have been debunked, they're useless, like it's no good. Actually, it just makes me look like I have an agenda. My agenda is to help people create change. So actually, I think most people, they're on their journey. And if someone wants to make a change, there's certain things, like if someone's going through bereavement, for example, counseling might be very helpful for them, just to talk through where they're at. And if someone has depression, maybe certain kind of, let's say, tapping therapies and things like that might be really, really useful for them. And I just think if you look in any other aspect of life, let's say someone thinks that a certain genre of music is the best. Actually, they don't have to convince everyone else that every other genre of music is inferior. All they have to do is be an advocate for their genre of music. So I'm not going to shit on any other therapy, because I think that people, in the same way that there'll be certain music genres that you like and don't like, that's the journey that you're on. And when something resonates with you, you're gonna stick with that because it gives you something that you need. And by having my podcast and YouTube channel, some people that I've actually ended up, being the therapist and them as a client, have said they've been struggling with something for like 10 years. But then they my bit resonates with them and it helps to give them some kind of a breakthrough. That's great. And I think, as hypnotherapists, we need to put more of our stuff out there, because there's still too many misconceptions. There's still too much ignorance. It's still not a dominant modality. People would look at psychotherapy, which basically means CBT and certain kind of more traditional psychotherapeutic, probably parts of counseling in that as well. Hypnotherapy is kind of like, in my experience, rarely the first thing that people will use to deal with an issue. They'll have tried everything else, and then they're like, oh, I've got nothing to lose now, I'll try this thing. That is changing. I've seen that change, but still for a lot of people, it's either, they're desperate and they've tried other things and then they give this a go, or it is because they know someone that's had a good experience and then they have that kind of referral or kind of introduction to it because the social proof is already there at that point. And what's happening there is that they're coming in with a level of belief or conviction. And I think as therapists, we've we need to use every kind of element that we can: prestige, placebo, convincers, social proof, reputation, like everything, because all of that, you throw it into the mix and it can add to the efficacy of change. And if we can help people change, then they become advocates for us. I've had so many clients because my previous clients have recommended me to new people. Well, that creates a ripple effect. A good therapist doesn't have to look for clients because your clients become your marketing. I think it's a wonderful thing. So we don't need to knock the other stuff. We just have to really be passionate about doing our thing.
Yeah. Do you wear a suit when you do your sessions?
I used to because I felt that in the early days, certain um, certain beliefs would be attributed to unconscious things, so like the quality of my suit, the brand on the tie, how expensive my watch was, the fact that I was in Harley Street, a very prestigious location.
Yes.
For me, I just put that into the category of prestige, and it meant that when I was a very inexperienced therapist, the prestige got me so far down the journey, so that trust was already there, that credibility was already there. These days, I don't wear suits, in all honesty. Even at conferences, I might wear a blazer, but I don't really wear suits because I feel like it was almost kind of like a post-hypnotic suggestion for myself. It was like Dumbo's feather, that if I wear the suit, that's my suit of armor to put me in that particular state.
Yeah.
I honestly don't feel like I need that suit now. So therefore, it would just be for show or status, and I don't feel like I need that.
That's so interesting. I was gonna say the one time I've had a mental health session in England. Someone that I knew was studying abroad there. I went to visit them, and they're like, "Hey, my therapist told them you're dealing with OCD stuff," which I was deeply in my 20s. Not that I'm over it now, but it was very severe then. And they said, like, look, my therapist will meet you free. This guy just wants to meet you. And I went into this building, up the stairs. This guy was in a full suit. I've never seen a therapist in New York City wearing this nice suit with a tie. And I have to tell you, I mean, in addition to just being, I think in general, interestingly enough, with all the kind of stereotypes of, like, in the UK, yeah, no one lets out their emotions. Yeah, okay, but you seem to the being top of hypnosis and NLP, like, definitely ahead of the US in terms of accepting these things. So interesting twist there. And it proved again, this guy was just like very effective, a very effective CBT based therapist that helped me. But I do think the suit made a difference. It was like a little bit of something that I'm like, oh man, Adam works at Harley Street. Like, if he's not wearing a suit, I'd be shocked. I actually am a little surprised that, like, yeah, you don't do it still. But I guess that kind of dovetails into this question, which is, what do you think you are consciously, maybe you're not consciously at this point, what do you think you are bringing to the table in terms of the kind of hypnotherapist you are these days? Are you someone that is very chameleon-like? Like, if you have someone that's more Catholic, are you going to start kind of adjusting your approach to use some of that lingo to model them, one of those, like, do whatever it takes type of therapist that changes everything to reflect the beliefs? Or do you have some kind of, do you find yourself floating a little more Ericksonian? I know you mentioned nested loops. Like, what do you find yourself bringing to the table if you had to put a description on it?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And just on the suits, I've got a rack of very expensive suits. It almost seems a tragedy that I'm not putting them to use. So maybe I'll do some more video content so I can kind of
yes.
get some more mileage out of those suits. But I think in terms of the style, I would just say calibration and sensory acuity are just two very vital ingredients into a good therapist. And I don't think you have to necessarily mimic the accent or the tone, but there's certain things that just kind of help to build rapport generally. And I think that in terms of labels, I think quite often labels of kind of Ericksonian or authoritative or traditional or whatever it might be, I feel like why would you create limitations on your ability to work with clients? Like why give yourself a box that you don't need to have?
Yes.
And clients don't care about this stuff. They don't say, I'm looking for an Ericksonian
Right.
therapist. They just say, I'm looking for a hypnotherapist, or I'm looking for a therapist that can help me. Can you help me? And I think if you kind of become too attached to a modality or a style and that kind of stuff, one, it gives you less choices rather than more. And part of what attracted me to NLP was this idea that the more resources you have and the more choices you have, the more flexibility you have in your life and your options. Therefore, why know that and believe that and then give yourself less choices and less options? That seems, ironic in many sense. So I would say I'm a big believer of, and it might sound like a weird reference, but if you remember Star Trek, there was this kind of enemy called the Borg. And what the Borg did was
Yes.
kind of try and synthesize and kind of extrapolate anything of value and then integrate it into its kind of worldview. So if I see an approach that I think is very effective or useful, I'm thinking, right, can I build this into my style of hypnotherapy without attaching labels to it, without attaching, kind of certain approaches? And I think the people that really get obsessed with modalities and structures are the trainers, because they've got a vested interest in having their approach be the right approach, particularly if it's these kind of catch-all approaches that say, right, it works for anything. Well, now what you're doing is you're trying to put the client to force it into your funnel, into your, acronym, your modality, irrespective of what the client is actually going to benefit most from. That's a disservice to the client. So I'm a big believer that, as therapists, if we can take anything of value from any other kind of approach that works and integrate that into how we work and our style, we're going to be better therapists. And the better therapists we are, the better value we can create for our clients. So I wouldn't really say, there's certain things that I love. I love metaphor. I love nested loops. I love levels of disassociation. I love parts therapy. I like doing inner child work. I've used past life regression. But I'm not going to say, oh, I'm a metaphorical Ericksonian hypnotist. Why? Because there's so many other stuff that I love doing as well. I love the work of Gordon Emerson in terms of resource states therapy, and before that, he was a big advocate of ego state therapy. I think there's some amazing stuff there, but equally, I wouldn't want to attach and say, right, I'm the resource state therapy guy in the UK. Like, why? Because there's so many other cool stuff that I get to do just by being this kind of chameleon. I think you used the word, and I like that word. I think it's great. Like a shapeshifter hypnotist, I think is a great archetype to step into.
Oh, I love that. The shapeshifter. That is good. That is good. Yeah, I certainly wonder about also, I mean, I think within that, there are certain fallbacks, obviously, you can find on. I know that some people describe themselves as that, but they find themselves just doing a lot of parts therapy work. In your case, I know you do a lot. You go to root cause a lot. What is so? Let me hear your take on that. I'm curious about this because I guess it kind of goes back to what you were learning in the world of academic psychotherapy too. When I started early on, I trained with Jeffrey Stevens, the late Jeffrey Stevens, who was a direct hypnotist advocate, and he was also of the also recently passed Jonathan Chase school of thought that, well, if you just there's certain people you can say you're a non-smoker now, and boom, you're a non-smoker. And the imaginative part of me goes, yeah, why shouldn't that be the case? Hypnosis, you're changing their wiring, therefore you could do a direct suggestion, and boom. And then what I found out as I started digging deeper into some of these direct hypnotists their work and the results that a lot of times if you weren't going to cause or really get into that root, then eventually the stuff would fade over time. Is that always the case that you've found? Is it just the most effective way of getting at change? Like, what does the philosophy of root cause mean to you? And I'd love you to put that against some of the direct hypnotist school of thought.
Yeah. So I think, there's a lot of therapists I really respect that really mock the root cause, kind of thing, because they're like, well, there's too many things that could be the root cause of it. How could you possibly get to the root cause? And I don't think you need to actually get to the specific point of inception, because a lot of people with phobias, for example, they don't know. Like, they could have been 2 years old and a spider comes out of, toy blocks and it freaked them out. They don't remember that. So you can't always get to the root cause. But there is value in going to a point and saying, well, look, there was a time when this thing wasn't there. So therefore, you've definitely got the neural pathways to have a different way of operating. There had to have been a point of inception that from that point onwards, something changed, which in all honesty was probably a coping mechanism to something, awful. Sometimes it's fucking obvious. Like, if someone was raped, and then at that point onwards, they're binge eating because they, at some level, want to make them less desirable to predators. Like, it's fucking obvious what the root cause there. And if someone, I've worked with so many phobic clients, and it's just kind of like they can recall like the neighbor's dog, like jumping up and barking at them. And when I asked them, like, well, proportionate to your height, how much bigger was the dog? And they're like, twice my size. So it's like, okay, that's the equivalent of a bear for an adult male. Like, of course you would be terrified at that particular point. So sometimes there is value in going to the root cause, because and I use this phrase, which sow seed of doubt. I say, well, it's highly likely you created a belief at that point to make sense of what happened. But what if 1 + 1 = 3? And I want them to acknowledge the possibility that the belief that they created in that moment wasn't true and certainly isn't useful. Because then if we change the belief, and a lot of the times, like, the root cause, like, that's already happened in the past. So what actually happened is almost immaterial. But if it led to a belief system and that belief system is still with them now, actually that's the bit that you want to change. And although I like working with kind of, particularly with people with trauma, they do recall the very moment that this thing freaked them out. Maybe it was someone, in the military and they saw their friend get blown up, or maybe someone was doing a presentation and they had a panic attack live on stage. Like, sometimes there is a reason why things happen from that point onwards. Sometimes there isn't. I'm a big advocate of Robert Dilt's logical levels. And, it's kind of like, well, if you just say, right, you're a non-smoker, it's not saying you have no desire to smoke. It's saying you're a non-smoker. They're trying to make a shift at the identity level of the logical levels. Or it might be a suggestion that links to values. Like, you no longer value smoking. You don't need to smoke anymore because you value your health and well-being much more than you ever do the temporary gratification of a cigarette. So then what you're doing is you're working at the values level, or it might be the belief level. What a lot of I would say beginning hypnotists tend to do is they give suggestions at the behavioral level. But what if the behavioral level is a consequence of the belief or the values or the identity that come up before that? Well, then you could say, well, operating at the identity level is the equivalent of a root cause, because everything flows from that level outwards. So again, I would say there's value in this, particularly with phobias. Like, you want to get to the point. I ask clients to prepare for the first session of a phobia by thinking about 3 key memories, and it's first, worst, and last. So, and I say the first doesn't have to be when it all started. It's just the first memory you can remember of this particular anxiety. And the worst is the most intense it's ever been. And the last is the most recent. And all I'm going to do is model the strategy of not what or why, but how how do they get themselves to that point of
Hmm.
freaking out? Because it's a recipe, and those three memories are going to give me everything I need to figure out what it is. And it normally is how the thing looks, how it's moved, proximity, their choices as to how they can navigate away from whatever this thing is. Like you see patterns over time, but the idea that you have to kind of get to the root cause isn't true. What is helpful though is that a lot of clients have this idea that you need to deal with the root cause. So there's this lovely phrase that I have, and I'll ask a client, I'll say, what's the biggest tree in your garden or in your neighborhood? And they make a picture of it in their mind. And I say, how difficult would it be to take that tree out by the roots? Bear in mind, this is the biggest tree in their garden or their neighborhood. It's impossible. And I said, but what if we could go back in time to the point where this tree was a tiny sapling? How easy would it be to get the tree out by the roots then? And they're like, oh, easy. You could just do it with one hand. And I'm like, right, well, I think we need to go back to the point where this belief was created because we can get it out by the roots then. They're already on board. I've paced where they're at. I've given them a metaphor that seems something's impossible and now it's possible. And because they buy into that, now when we do regression to cause, it's more likely to work because I primed them in a particular way. So for me, it's not like, why be a slave to, I'm a root cause therapist. It's like, no, it can work really well with certain clients.
That is the best root cause metaphor I've ever heard. Holy moly, it's right there too. Wow. That was good. That was good. If you're listening, that was gold. So good. Yeah, love that, Adam. Holy moly. Thank you for that. As I was thinking, my brain is going in so many different directions, which is probably by nature, in this interview. I want to ask you something that's a little, let me ask you this. A little off the beaten path, perhaps, but, as you were talking about logical levels, I started thinking about, these hypnotists that invent new processes where they're like, okay, we're going to hit them at the behavioral level, then we'll hit the values, then we'll hit the identity, and then we'll do like a full scan. And look, there's a lot of wildly, it. We saw it in Hypnothoughts Live. If you look at the roster of any hypnosis conference, the fact that there can still be hypnosis conferences, the fact that this can be beyond science into art, and I really do think this is an art form as much as it's a science, makes me go, wow, there's so many possibilities. You obviously, you've got a very tight running business going on with working with people. I'm sure there are processes in place, and helping people with hypnotherapy is enough of a job with even if you were just like Greg, I'm the parts therapy guy, you could spend the rest of your career really making a lot of profound changes doing that. Do you ever get a chance to experiment? Do you play around with it? Do you have like the office hours where you're like, okay, come in, let me toy with this new process? I'm sure you might get some of that in sessions, but I wonder when it comes to things that might be even dramatically different, or you hear of a new process, you're like, okay, what if I hit him at this level and at this level? What is that side of you? How do you honor that side of yourself that maybe wants to tinker around if it's outside the bounds of what you've built for yourself?
Yeah, it's an amazing question. I think like one of my core values is innovation, is experimentation. And it's about 5 years ago now, but when the pandemic came along, I was in Harley Street, had very expensive rent, quite a prestigious address, but I canceled that contract at Harley Street because I knew I wouldn't be seeing clients, and that's the very time that I created the Hypnotist podcast. And I had two main intentions when I set out to do that. One was to experiment and attempt to be a pioneer in some way in the world of hypnosis. Like that was the intention. I also had an intention to make an impact. And I set the bar so low it would be impossible to fail. The intention was with the podcast, if I can make one change to one person's life, then the podcast is a success. That's a very, very low bar. But it means I'm guaranteed to win. And I like these things of feeling like, Well, I did it in the first couple of weeks, and from that point onwards, it's just kind of everything is kind of letting your winners ride. But in the sense of the innovation, I had a lot of experience doing weight loss hypnotherapy at the time that I launched the podcast. I'd recorded my voice in all of those sessions, so I started putting them out there, but it got too repetitive because a lot of these weight loss hypnosis were very similar to each other. Now I know that you can have the same kind of process, but introduce one new metaphor. Change the chronology of a few things. It sounds entirely different. But back then they were, quite formulaic. So I thought, right, I needed new stuff, but it was a lockdown, so I'm watching movies, and I watched a very weird TV show, science fiction TV show on Amazon Prime called Tales from the Loop. And it had some fascinating storylines. Like there was this sphere that if you look into, you could then see your future stuff. And I'm like, this is timeline stuff. And you had this kind of body swap thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is changing perception. And it had this other storyline where you could freeze time and navigate around that. So each of those episodes of Tales from the Loop, I created a brand new hypnosis session inspired by that. It just wasn't a very popular TV show. So it was amazing for me because it gave me this ability to play with kind of perception and time and all of this stuff. What really helped the podcast grow was that I watched the movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper and Robert De Niro. And I think the concept of you take a pill like NZT and then you tap into more of your brain's potential. Secretly, most hypnotherapists are in hypnotherapy because they subscribe to that idea that we can get more out of who we are. So I thought, right, let's use NZT as a metaphor and certain elements of the storyline. Like straight after Bradley Cooper takes this pill, he tidies his flat. Why? Because if you've got unlimited resources, being organized and intentional helps you get more out of those things. Well, that's as true for someone taking NZT as not taking NZT. So there were certain kind of elements of the storyline that I just turned into a hypnosis session, put a post on social media and said, like, I've created this hypnosis download inspired by the movie Limitless. If you want it, drop me a message. And what that actually was a link to my podcast. And I didn't realize at the time, but what I was actually doing is training the algorithm of the podcast to get it in front of more people like that were getting the direct link. I didn't know that at the time, but that's kind of what was happening. And then I saw a big boost in the numbers. So I'm like, okay, what other movies can I make hypnosis sessions from? So the movie Inception, there was Interstellar, which has this incredible kind of, we might talk about the fourth dimension before, but that kind of element of this very famous scene where he goes close to a black hole, and then when he returns, his daughter is older than he is, which is, very similar to the thought experiment that Einstein did of traveling at the speed of light to realize that time is relative to, the different variables. So I created loads of hypnosis sessions, and even now, I will create hypnosis sessions from very random elements of inspiration, because I feel like there is too much. I've heard from people I respect, like Mike Mandel, for example. I think he's amazing. Him and Chris have said several times on the podcast, like everything that can be known in the world of hypnosis has already been figured out. We already know all the different kind of modalities. We're just giving different names for it. And I think the opposite. I think we're at the tip of a very big iceberg, and there is so many things that we simply don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And that's why in Ireland in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing a talk about hypnosis in the fourth dimension, because I think the imagination operates more like a four-dimensional realm. And if that's true, but we're treating it like a three-dimensional realm, then by the very definition of fourth dimensional physics, there is so many things that is possible. Like, why can't we have, for example, I'll share this with you because it highlights the point. There's a movie called Tenet, by Chris Nolan, and they have a storyline in there which is based on this temporal pincer movement, which is where you go backwards and forwards in time at the same time. I've worked with people that have been, raped or, had horrible traumatic things. And what we do is we visit that moment in time from the future, from the past, and in the present, teleporting to that moment, colliding with this moment in time to give it a new meaning. That's fourth dimensional thinking brought into PTSD hypnotherapy session. So, yeah, I mean, for me, I think we have a duty to be innovators and pioneers in the world of hypnosis. Because if we're just copying, the same kind of modalities, it just has a different acronym. Like, how are we moving it forward? Like, we can only really move it forward if we try some crazy random shit and see if that works more effectively than the stuff we've been doing up to that point. So, yeah, I love experimenting.
I am so with you about that. Yes, it's the human potential movement. It's not like that came to an end. It's like, oh, we found the potential. I mean, that's the whole idea. It's constantly looking forward. I mean, I put this out as a Facebook post maybe about a year and a half ago, and I was actually looking for some real answers, though. People who know me from Facebook sometimes question my intention, and I'm glad they do and continue to. But I do think this is a very apt question, which is this. NLP, neurolinguistic programming, was using the mind as a computer metaphor as its crux. This is the idea. Now, look, there are a lot of people out of the UK, often, though some of the US too, that are like, yeah, that was a simplification. When we look at the science, if you read that Oxford Handbook of Hypnotherapy, Hypnosis or whatever, you start going like, okay, it's not as much of a computer as we think it is, and memory is constantly changing, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Still a great metaphor. It works. It's good. Why aren't we playing around with this quantum computer thing that keeps coming up? If quantum computers are the next level of programming, where are the NLP practitioners that are like, well, maybe the mind's more like that? And then what kind of techniques can we come out of there? I feel like there's the quantum computer factor. Maybe it's tapping a little bit into what you're going with Tenet there. Could lead us to some very interesting ideas about the way, if we can program these machines to come at it from infinite number of directions, then how can we use that to reprogram ourselves?
Yeah, I think the computer metaphor is certainly a part of NLP. I think what was more influential on me was the presuppositions or the tenets of NLP.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no failure, only feedback, and the function of your communication is or the purpose of your communication is the response you get, because these link to things that are generative in nature, like sensory acuity, like changing your approach and elicitation. I think some of Bandler's stuff on design human engineering looked at this element of, okay, precision elicitation is this sense of, well, let's figure out exactly what's going on, this combination of kind of thoughts. And he touched on this in the sense that he was looking at thoughts almost like a hologram. So when people use those gestures, it's like it's in a three-dimensional space rather than just like images in the mind. It's kind of like it's out there being created, and you would see from the hand gestures like how that was created. So I do think that NLP had more to offer than just a computer metaphor. And I think modeling of the how was such a vital distinction, because so many therapists up to that point had been obsessed with, but why is this happening? And I still have clients that come to me and they say, I don't know why I feel this way. So I do like a matrix metaphor with them. And I said, just imagine there's two pills, red pill, blue pill. The red pill is that you know exactly why this is happening to you, but you keep it for the rest of your life. And the blue pill is you have no idea why this thing ever happened, but you don't feel this way anymore. What do you choose? And they always choose, I don't need to know why. I just want it to go away. Okay, great. Now we can work on that.
Yes.
But before you get that commitment from them, but why? But why? It's like, no, we've got to take that off the table. And I do think computers as a metaphor is kind of like a natural thing, because you could look at memory as kind of like short-term memory, long-term memory. You could look at intelligence as kind of like the CPU processing power. Like as a metaphor, it kind of works. But my metaphor that I've been using more often now is that the imagination is a four-dimensional realm. And we know that can be true because when you access a memory, a lot of people will access a memory and take a first-person perspective. And that's the equivalent in a three-dimensional realm of teleporting back in time to that memory. Okay. And a lot of anticipatory fear is going forward to an event that hasn't happened yet. So if we look, and I know lots of, physicists say, look, the fourth dimension isn't time. But, for the purpose of me using it, I look at two key distinctions to separate three-dimension and four-dimension, and that is time and perception. And that is, okay, time is something you can navigate in the fourth dimension. Again, certain physicists would disagree with that. And then the other thing is that perception isn't limited to one perspective. So in the reason that Schrodinger's cat as a thought experiment works in a three-dimensional realm is everything is possible before you open the box because you've only got your perception, which is outside of the box. In a four-dimensional realm, you would know what's happening outside of the box and inside of the box simultaneously, and therefore you would know, if that makes sense. I think also we've got this element of multiple dimensions. And I love the fact that even Marvel, which is a fairly kind of mainstream, kind of film franchise, introduced this idea of the multiverse. And I love saying to a client, I said, have you seen like Doctor Strange in the multiverse? And, oh yeah, I've seen that. Well, just imagine there is infinite versions of you. Do you reckon there's a version of you that exists that doesn't have this problem anymore? And they're like, well, I guess if there's infinite versions of me, yeah, that must happen. Let's visit that person. Let's see what they're doing. Let's see how they figured it out. And what you're doing is you're introducing infinite resource states. And then you're saying, of all these infinite resource states, let's go to the version of you that no longer has this issue anymore and is living their best life. And let's harness those resources. Why don't we, of this 80-20 rule, forget the 80-20 and go straight into the top 0.00001% of the best strategies, the best resources, and the most aligned values. And then you get to kind of leapfrog. And then you're not modeling excellence, you're modeling, let's say, like a quantum version of excellence is kind of like that's what made people like Limitless. It wasn't that they got a little bit better. It's like, no, they got like a light year forward, an exponential growth in kind of capabilities. And I think that's why for me, I like it as a metaphor because it gives more possibilities. I call it the playground of possibilities because there is infinite possibilities because the imagination isn't restricted by anything. Like you've had dreams of flying, you've had dreams of going backwards and forwards in time, of taking on the perspective of a different entity, let alone yourself. Like that's all possible in your dreams, but you don't expect to be able to do those things in your three-dimensional reality. But I think where the real value is harnessing this kind of four-dimensional realm and then bringing value back in the three-dimension. And that's why, I talk about Einstein, because his thought experiment at traveling close to the speed of light led to an actual general theory of relativity. That changed like the aviation industry. It changed the, kind of space rocket industry, like because of his theory. So that absolutely did create changes in our three-dimensional reality, but he could never have driven, actually flew at the speed of light in reality, but he could do it in his imagination. So four-dimensional thinking led to actual changes in our three-dimensional reality. And I think that's the exciting bit of this. If we can harvest the potential of our imagination, then we can do a lot more in our actual lives.
Oh my gosh. I asked for loops. I am in them, Adam. You're giving them to me. And maybe not. Maybe I'm just like hypnotically drawn to what you're saying. I'm now like, I wonder what would happen if Adam released this recording on his podcast, but without my questions. Would that be an episode of his show? I don't know. Because it feels like it feels like I'm going through an intervention with you right now, man. I love this. One of the things that this brought up in me was a question that I sometimes have about therapy in general and hypnotherapy, which is this. Sometimes what people think they want isn't what they actually want. That's one thing. And then the other piece is this, like, what is, if generativity and possibility are kind of these, on one level I might say, well, I want more confidence. But really what I want is the ability to, keep writing every single day and play out my full creative potential. And even like have my subconscious aligned with my conscious mind in a way, like bringing them together so that I can access that creative state. But it comes to you in this, I would argue, for the sake of the metaphor, 3D version of like, I'm just not really confident around people. Do you feel ever that you have almost, I don't want to use responsibility, but I guess there is kind of an imperative for a responsible hypnotherapist to go beyond what people think they want. It's so often about, here's the symptom, here's the problem, fix the problem in hypnotherapy. But given that it's about human potential and there's always so much more beyond the traditional therapeutic interventions, I mean, how can we as people that see the power of the mind push people to go beyond the place that they don't even know they want in a world that doesn't really advertise to that?
Yeah. So I like the train of thought there, and if you project it onto a client, then what you're doing is you're assuming you know what the client wants, and I think that's unethical. What I think is entirely ethical is to give them choices, or give them the suggestion that they're going to find something which takes it to that next level for them. And when I'm working with people with a phobia, I frame it in a particular way so that it could just be the thing, but it could be so much more. So I'll say to them, look, when I work with people, and I used to do before COVID, like this monthly workshop, 25 lifelong arachnophobes, terrified of spiders, but at the end they're holding tarantulas. And I remember saying, and I say at the end of every workshop, I would say, like, this could just be, you've had this phobia all your life and you don't have it anymore. And you can go home and whenever you see a spider, it's fine. You just pick them up and take them outside, and that's fine. Your life is still better. But then I say, but what if the fact that you had this lifelong fear and you don't have it anymore is evidence that the next time you have a fear, that is also changeable. And you've got irrefutable evidence in your life every time you pick up a spider that fear is temporary and it can change. And then that next thing that you're afraid of doesn't have to stop you living the life that you want. What if you go away from this, knowing that you can live the life that you want? Now that's a post-hypnotic suggestion. Any hypnotist would recognize that. And a lot of people would forget that I say that. And all that's happened is that they had a fear of spiders for most of their life and then they don't have it anymore. But a few of them won't. A few of them will be like, yeah, damn right. Like, I got over that fear of spiders. That means that, I can get over this fear of public speaking. And, I can be self-employed and I can do this thing that I've always wanted to do. And I can write that book I've always wanted to write. Great. But I think as hypnotists, we can lead, but we can't force. We can suggest, but we can't, it's not our decision to make, it's their decision to make. And I think that's where the balance is for me, is that you show them how it could be so much more, but whether or not they move in that direction, that's down to them.
That's the free choice piece, which I do like. Yeah. No, I think that's very interesting. About metaphors, and I'll ask you, this is like a total shop question, but maybe it'll help people out there that want to be better storytellers in general. I've always, as I've read all the Bandler and Grinder books and Ericksonian stuff, I've always thought to myself, oh my gosh, why am I not a metaphor guy? And again, there's a belief system right there, but a story, but it's a story I tell myself. And I wonder, I've always thought, okay, well, what do I need to do? Is it just that I need to start thinking in terms of resource states more, and then backplay it and build a catalog of metaphors? How is there people out there that they just seem to spit out the right story or the right film reference, and they get the whole story and they get the resource state? And I feel like it can be a practice for some people, but at the same time, I've also heard people say, like, no, it's just you gotta just think about it like this. What is your take on that? Was that something you needed to develop? Were you just naturally like tapping into a storytelling ability that you always had? Did you have to think about stories differently? Like, what was that for you?
I think it's a bit of both. But I do like how most things map across. So I love the hero's journey, because that's such a broad metaphor that relates to so many people's individuals. And if you think of kind of like whether it's Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, like so many books and stories follow the hero's journey where it's kind of like there is some kind of flaw or issue facing the main character. They go on this journey, they meet some kind of challenge to that. Everything looks hopeless. It's the point of the abyss. They dig deep, they find a way through, and then they're tested on that, and then they're victorious in the test, and then their life is changed from that point on. I mean that's such a broad metaphor, but it works. Why the hero's journey is in so many books and movies is because it's a nice story arc. Okay, so therefore any hypnotist can just kind of have variations of the hero's journey and have that. A metaphor for transformation. Most people, like how many hypnotists have some kind of logo of a butterfly as part of their hypnosis? It's because it's the classic metaphor of transformation. Frogs into princes, and another metaphor of transformation. So you've got, metaphors for transformation, you've got metaphors of change, and kind of digging deep and kind of breaking through. And I think, yeah, it's useful to kind of have a few kind of starting points. But I'm a big believer in allowing the unconscious to do the therapy for you. So how I structure most of my sessions is that I'm mindfully asking lots and lots of questions, having a loose idea of what kind of modality or protocol or rough metaphor I'm going to use. And then it is weird. Like my unconscious is the hypnotist doing the therapy. And sometimes I'll listen back to my own recordings and I'm like, wow, where did that come from? I have no fucking idea.
Yeah.
But how can we work with the unconscious if we're not also putting the unconscious to work? Let the unconscious do the heavy lifting, set the intention, and then see what it comes up with. And if it's good, you can use it again in a similar situation. And if it isn't, you learn from it. And one of my favorite beliefs is you either win or you learn. So like if you work with a hypnosis client and a metaphor doesn't quite sit right, who cares? Like they don't notice. But if it does, you get the benefit. I also think there is a lot of value in the metaphors that the client already resonates with. So quite often I remember this lady who, she was a recluse. She'd been sexually abused in her teenage years. She was a hoarder as well. There was several things going on. I just said, what's your favorite TV show? Like, what character do you really resonate with? She was an American, but she resonated with Doctor Who. Now, here's the thing. At that point, I was going to do timeline anyway, but she's given me the gift of using the TARDIS as a way of doing timeline that I wouldn't have done had she not given me that gift. So sometimes the clients just make it so easy for you. They tell you, I'm an atheist, but I work with a lot of people that are quite religious. And I'll use biblical metaphors. I'll use, for me, God is just, whether you call it the unconscious, the superconscious, it's kind of like a very powerful resource. So for me, religion and God maps across quite nicely with kind of hypnosis anyway, because it's kind of like it's an ability to harness a resource state. So the clients will make it so easy to become metaphorical. You just got to ask questions and listen, I think.
Yeah. You strike me as someone that your presence is very grounded, very, very calm, contained. I feel confident and in a warm authority talking to you. It's specifically, I mean, maybe you have to be with a podcast called The Hypnotist. I don't know. But what I was going to say is that, when you're out in the world, as somebody that loves living in the loops, you've got the nested loops, you've got these movie metaphors, you've mentioned fourth dimensional metaphors, and you've talked about the Christopher Nolan stuff and Tenet. Do you, in the real world, going out there, practical day to day, do you actually experience life in a multidimensional way? Like, does that come up for you? Do you see coincidences and go like, oh, that's the synchronicity? Or is it really just in this realm where it lives the most? How does that actually exist for you? Just truly curious.
Yeah, I'm a real pragmatist. So although I think the multiverse is an excellent metaphor, and a way to harness resource states. I think the imagination for me acts more like a four-dimensional realm, but I don't think I exist in a four-dimensional realm. I say like I'm a three-dimensional entity with a four-dimensional imagination. So me being in a four-dimensional realm is as likely as, Bart Simpson jumping off the screen and walking around our three-dimensional reality. Like it's not going to happen.
Right.
So, so sometimes, it's funny because I think these are very powerful metaphors, but sometimes I see people and they talk about law of attraction in a way, and it's kind of like, all right, I know it's a belief system, and I know you're saying that belief system with congruency, but like, don't drink your own Kool-Aid that much that you actually believe that by you thinking in a particular frequency, you can actually manifest shit. Like, no, it's a powerful metaphor. It might actually get you in a
Right.
resource state. So I'm this weird dichotomy in the sense that, I think that incredible things are possible, but I'm also not afraid to call out on the bullshit on stuff. And I think there's a hell of a lot of bullshit out there. And it's fine if people say like it's a metaphor, it's a belief system, it's a paradigm that makes me feel empowered. But a lot of people are trying to use these metaphors and stuff, and they say it's true. And it's kind of like, okay, no, that just means it's a really strong belief. But there is a distinction there. So of course there is going to be coincidences. Of course there's going to be serendipity and, moments of deja vu. Do I think this is the fourth dimension wormhole giving me a glimpse of different realities? Not really, if I'm honest, and I think there are certain people that will jump on these things using cognitive bias and, certain kind of certain flaws and biases that the human mind has as convincers to sell them their particular brand of Kool-Aid that they want them to consume. And I think I'm the right balance of being very empowered and positive and enthusiastic without without bullshitting myself that, for example, I have this course called Hypnotic Wealth. But that doesn't mean I can just hypnotize myself to be a billionaire. What I can do is use hypnosis to help me make really good decisions about risk, to generally do the kind of things that over time accumulate incredible wealth using principles like compounding and kind of risk reward ratios and all of this kind of stuff. But if it was the case that all it takes is kind of affirmation and self-hypnosis and law of attraction to have anything, why is it that the richest man in the world right now is Elon Musk, that is an absolute workaholic, as opposed to someone that's just fucking amazing at law of attraction? It's because law of attraction is just an empowering belief system. But unfortunately, a lot of people, you know, they like the virtue signaling, and they like the kind of, oh, I manifest this in my life. No, you went out and you worked for that, or you took out a loan to buy that car. You didn't fucking manifest it. You just did that thing, and I think there is a lot of bullshit, because there's a lot of very desperate people that are looking for something magical and wonderful to make them feel like they can live this kind of incredible life. Um, and I think hypnosis can do that in certain aspects. I think hypnosis is great to change emotional states. I think it's great to um, get you out of certain kind of loops that are disempowering. I think it's great for that. I think it's great to kind of get a new sense of kind of purpose or clarity. But if I had a broken leg, I'm not using self-hypnosis. I'm going to the doctor. There's certain things that I think you use the right or the most suitable modality or protocol for the thing. If I'm going to invest, I'm investing in assets. I'm not hypnotizing myself to become, make a million the next year. The hypnosis can help me to actually make the decisions that can lead to those things. But, and I do think sometimes there is this weird incongruence that, people in hypnotherapy and kind of related fields like personal development, they're charlatans, they're bullshit artists. And I think, it's not for me to call these people out in the same way that it's not for me to, criticize any other therapeutic modality. I'm going to keep doing my thing because, I think is an effective thing. But, sometimes I look at these things and it makes me laugh. It's kind of like, yeah, it's a belief system, it's a metaphor, but it's not real.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This is, yeah, if you, you must really, I'm just imagining you walking through the hallway of a hypnosis conference. Because, yeah, you're confronted with it on so many, you've got like the evidence-based hypnotist that may be a little too straight. And then you've got some really wild stuff. And
but just to say, Greg, I like the wild stuff. I just treat it as metaphors and belief systems
me too.
And kind of ways of thinking, rather than the bit that I found really useful as a general belief system is not to worry too much about is it true or not. It's more, is it useful or not? Is that way of thinking useful? And just to kind of make me sound like not so righteous, I never pass a wishing well without throwing a coin in. I have a collection of crystals. I have a vision board. I just know what these things are. If I throw a coin in the wishing well, it's a post-hypnotic suggestion of a positive intention that I want that probably is going to prime my reticular activating system to help me get that particular thing. I know what it is, but I put the coin in there anyway because I'm going to get a little bit of cognitive dissonance by creating an action linked to that thing. I have a vision board because I want to be clear on my intentions. It's not because having the vision board magically manifests stuff. It's because by knowing what I want, I'm more likely to make decisions that align and create self-fulfilling prophecies. So all of these things, it's not like I'm mocking them. I do most of them. I just do them with a sense that I know that these are just, they work on a certain level, but not quite often in the way that they're presented or misrepresented.
Oh my gosh. Is there, the next tough question I've got is, and I know you have to go soon. We haven't even talked about nested loops. I really wanted to get into that more, but maybe we can say that for another time. It's a very interesting topic. And something I, love a lot. My next question is this. Are you sure that you don't have any cognitive biases?
Oh, I definitely have.
That would prevent you, well, and I mean specifically, that would prevent you from being completely open to the idea that you could experience something beyond rational explanation. Like, are you open to that possibility still?
Oh,
that
course.
Magic could be real. Okay, cool. I feel that way too. What I would say
is magic or anything like why did the Vikings believe that lightning was Thor angrily hitting his hammer against the clouds? Because they didn't have a better explanation of it.
Yes.
And there's lots of things that we encounter that at the time in history that we're living right now, we can't explain. And that's why a lot of people do look to religion and spiritual guidance and metaphors and tarot and horoscopes and those kind of things, because we can't make sense of stuff. Like the idea that we can make sense of everything in our existence is lunacy. Like we can't possibly, we'll never be able to do that, because there's infinite things that we don't know. But does it mean that it's magic? Like if we took, something like a satellite back a few hundred, that would look like magic. Like something like electricity, a light bulb would look like magic. So, am I open to the idea of magic? Well, yeah, but it depends on the definition of magic. Things that I can't currently explain is magical. And there's so many things. Like you hear stories of people that have very low probabilities of surviving cancer and yet still do. So the word miracle and magic gets used. What's more likely is that we just don't have the science currently to explain that particular thing. But as a hypnotist, I've worked with people with stage 4 cancer, and the whole thing is about, okay, let's have the suggestion that there is a possibility that you're one of those people that defy the odds, because then if it is happening at the belief level, at some kind of psychosomatic cellular level, responding to suggestions, we've got the possibility of that. I personally don't believe in past life regression in the sense that we've actually had past lives, but I use past life regression a lot because I think it's a powerful modality if people either don't know the cause or don't want to go back to, some kind of very kind of traumatic kind of thing. So I use all this stuff, and so I'm not here judging and mocking. I just think my preference is to say, like, what's useful, and rather than this kind of philosophical stuff of what's true. The squabbles I've seen on social media about people squabbling whether or not the unconscious is real and if trance is real and if this, it's like, I couldn't care. Like, my time is too valuable. It's
yes.
Like, is it useful as a, and it depends on the definition. I define unconscious as anything you're not consciously aware of in that moment of time. So based on my definition, it is true, because everyone that has a memory that they're not thinking about in the moment that they can retrieve, we can just say it is in the unconscious based on that definition. But this idea of endless kind of squabbles and posturing on social media about what's true and what isn't true and this and that, like, I see it for what it is. It's this element of they're trying to get significance from being right on something that is impossible to prove. I mean, that seems odd, but equally, if that's where you get your status and significance, go for it. Again, it's nice to feel good. It's nice to feel right. It's nice to feel like you're smarter than other people. Go for that if you want to do that. But there is these kind of lots of ironies that I see. I just obsess with what's useful for me and what's useful for my clients.
Yes. Oh my gosh, there is so much here. So many more questions. I really
It's almost like we've created lots of open loops here, Greg.
Adam, you have nailed the assignment. This guy has nailed it. Yes. No, this has been, I mean, I in a way, there's a part of me that always wants, or maybe it would satisfy my unconscious to be like, okay, that was a complete interview. But when it's complete, it's not as good. So I'm glad we've left it open. We're going to link to everything. Everybody needs to check out the podcast, The Hypnotist, available on all podcast platforms, as well as adamcox.co.uk, which we will link. That's adamcox.co.uk, to find your courses, to find stuff about your podcast. We're going to be appearing next to book sessions. And if you want to see Adam in almost a suit, if you go to the website, you can see it. Pretty much, it is a classy look you've got there. So you don't need to worry, man. But you'll break out more of the suit after this. That's what we've got. We've got a lot of nice open loops here. This has been. You definitely have stimulated a lot in my mind, which is all I can ask for. That's all I'm looking for, and even better to have such a competent and well-regarded hypnotist do it. So Adam, I am so grateful you came on. This has been amazing.
It's been a pleasure, Greg. Thank you.